Pinching pennies like that just makes you look poor. When we got married, my husband used to praise me for being frugal and a good wife. But just 2 years later, he changed. You're too poor for me. I'm going to live with my wealthy lover, so let's get a divorce. I thought, is that so? How wealthy is this lover of yours? He seemed to think he was supporting me, but he was sorely mistaken. This actually made things easier for me. I would gladly get a divorce from him quickly. My name is Anna, and I just turned 30, a full-time homemaker. I met Ben, my husband, who is 2 years my senior, through a mutual friend 3 years ago. He made a strong approach, and we quickly started dating. After a year of dating, we got married. Back then, I was a receptionist at a major department store, and Ben worked for a large corporation. Although we didn't have a wedding ceremony, our marriage was envied by those around us. Upon getting married, I quit my job to become a full-time homemaker. Ben's mother was a homemaker who was good at saving money. And he wanted me to be always at home and manage our household efficiently. He had lived at home until our marriage and had never done housework. However, after marrying me, he did most of the cleaning and laundry because he didn't want my hands to get rough. He treated me like a princess and wanted to cherish me. He would even say, "Anna, please stay beautiful like this forever." I reciprocated his feelings by being diligent with savings and managing our finances well. A year into our marriage, we were blessed with a cute son. Ben took paternity leave and was actively involved in bathing and putting our son to sleep daily, earning him praise as a hands-on dad. To show our son in the future, he bought a diary made of high-quality paper to keep a parenting diary together. At first, he eagerly wrote about our parenting and our relationship. Although he stopped writing in the diary after about 6 months, I continued to keep it meticulously to show it to our son someday. Ben's attitude drastically changed around the time our son turned 1. Not only did he stop contributing to the parenting diary, but also he stopped doing the household chores he used to do voluntarily. Furthermore, he began to find fault with my parenting and housekeeping. "Ugh, your cooking seems so poor. Dress him in better clothes. Our home feels so poor, it's depressing. Where did he go, who praised me for being good at saving money?" Moreover, he started coming home late, and we rarely had dinner together as a family of 3. On holidays, he often went out alone. When asked where he was going, he said, "I have to go out because our home feels poor." Furthermore, he complained about our sons crying at night and kicked us out of the bedroom. Reluctantly, my son and I started sleeping in the living room. Eventually, he even stopped holding our son. One day, after sending him off to work and finishing cleaning and laundry, I was getting ready to take our son to the park. Then the doorbell rang. "Hello. I'm coming." I peered through the intercom and saw an unknown woman standing there. I regretted responding without checking who it was. But since I had already responded, I decided to go out. "Good morning. Do you know who I am?" The woman, decked out in brand-name clothes, spoke rudely. "I shouldn't know anyone like this." As I pondered, she began. "The answer is, I'm Ben's girlfriend." So this is your son. And you must be his wife." I was confused by the sudden encounter. I couldn't just believe what the woman who had appeared out of nowhere said. "I will discuss this with my husband, so please leave now." "Well, then, I'll wait until he comes back. If I leave it to him, it'll drag on." Insisting like this, she wouldn't leave. It was intolerable to keep discussing this at the doorstep. Reluctantly, I let the woman inside. I suppose you will want to break up after hearing my story. But well, you seem to have no money, and you have a baby. You won't let go of Ben, right? Just then, our son started crying. Since my son is crying, could you please leave? I asked her, but she seemed not to care at all and just kept talking. According to her, she was the same age as me and the daughter of some company president. She had fallen in love with Ben at first sight and had approached him herself. They had quickly fallen for each other. And it had been about 3 months since they started dating. It was really unbelievable that she barged in suddenly and kept talking despite the baby crying. I was dumbfounded, thinking, is this really how the daughters of company presidents behave nowadays? Do you know what Ben says about you? The woman wouldn't stop talking. I'm telling you what he said. Before marriage, even though you earned little, you were a beautiful receptionist he could boast about. But now you are a poor-looking old woman with no income, whom he can't introduce to anyone. The meals you cook are shabby. You insist on home caring your son until he's 3. Because you are an unemployed homemaker who can't afford daycare. You are just a parasite, using the child as an excuse not to work and leech off him. Do you want to hear more? That's enough. It seemed that Ben really was having an affair with this woman. Anyway, I'll discuss this with my husband. I pushed the woman out the door. Divorce him quickly, will you? Oh, and you can keep that crybaby. She threw out as a parting shot and finally left. What an awful situation. Troublesome father, isn't he? I muttered while comforting my son. Late at night, my husband Ben returned home. There's something I need to talk about. What is it? I'm tired. If it's about parenting, complain somewhere else. His reply was typically dismissive. Today, your girlfriend came to our house. Hearing this, Ben's face went pale instantly, and he started to get agitated. But he soon brazened it out and threatened. I'm the one earning the money here. I don't mind if we get divorced. A poor person like you can't survive without me. You're already overwhelmed with childcare, so there's no way you can work and raise a child. Even if you worked, your skills wouldn't be enough to support a child. It would be difficult for you. Basically, you should be grateful that a high-earning, highly educated genius like me would have you as a wife, who is only good-looking and incompetent. Oh, but now you look like an old lady. He continued to belittle me, ignoring his own infidelity. His words hurt me more than his affair. How did I ever marry such a man, and why did I devote myself to him? The only solace was my adorable son. From that day on, Ben blatantly kept in touch with his mistress, even going on trips with her. The mutual friend who introduced us to each other tried to persuade him to stop the affair. But he wouldn't listen. Even our friend was utterly dismayed by how infatuated Ben was with her. Eventually, Ben even stopped giving the monthly $1,000 he had been contributing to household expenses. Meanwhile, I was so worn out from parenting and stress that I fell ill. My son was still young and the house was a mess. Nevertheless, my husband, unconcerned, continued to spend time with her. Unable to expect any help from my husband, I used local childcare support and domestic help services to manage. Upon learning this, Ben said, "You're using community services instead of just hiring a babysitter or maid. Always scrimping and saving, it's so poor looking." At last, any remaining feelings I had for him were gone. I was starting to think about when to bring up divorce. Seeing me disheveled from childcare and looking at me as if I were something dirty, Ben said. What's with that damaged hair? Can't you even take care of your hair? You're now a failure as a woman. I guess it's impossible. A poor person like you is no match for me. I'm going to live with my wealthy mistress, so let's get a divorce. She doesn't want the child, so you can have him. Saying this, he handed me the divorce papers. I had been waiting for this. I was internally overjoyed to avoid the hassle of initiating and the custody battle. With pleasure. Taking the divorce papers, I urged him to see the lawyer with me right away. Really? Is that okay? What? You're the one who brought it up, let's go now. Ben seemed to have thought I would be flustered. But seeing me prepared and spirited, he looked surprised. On the way back from law office, he said, I think my parents will want to see the child, so let's set up visits once a month. I'm starting a new family, so I don't really need to see him myself. I'll give you child support during the visits. How about $100 per month until he's 18? That should be enough for a poor person's son. I'm thinking about you properly even though we're getting divorced. I'm a kind person, right? His offer for child support was significantly below the standard rate. I was astounded at his ignorance or stinginess. It was unexpected that he would bring up child support himself. But I planned to demand property division as well, so he should be prepared. After getting home, I immediately began preparing to move out. While I was packing with my son, Ben spoke up. A jobless single mother can't pay rent, right? Can you even rent a place? You have no family to go back to. I'll be living in a huge apartment with my mistress. I'm canceling this house's lease by the end of the month. As a last act of mercy to a poor person like you, I'll send your belongings. You're probably moving to a rundown apartment near a supermarket, so leave your new address. I silently placed a paper with the address on the desk and left the house. A few days later, despite being out of state, Ben came to my new home with the movers. He seemed to have come to identify the place under the guise of guiding the movers, as the address was different from what he had expected. What? Why are you living here? Did you find a new man? My new residence was in an area known locally for its wealthy mansions. My father had died from an illness when I was young, and my mother raised me alone until she followed him 3 years later. Afterward, my maternal grandparents raised me. My grandmother passed away when I was 20. My grandfather, a well-known wealthy man, died 2 years before I married Ben. My mother was an only child, and I was the only grandchild for my grandparents. Thus, I inherited all of their assets. It's my own house. It was vacant because I was living out of state with you. Including other properties, my assets amount to about only $13 million. But I haven't been able to manage properly. Like you said, I'm just a parasitic poor person. So it's not as grand as you and your mistress's home, but it's a comfortable house. I said this sarcastically. Ben couldn't hide his shock and blurted out. What? Explain this to me. Thinking it a waste of time and energy to explain to this man, I remained silent. Then he said, that means it's part of my assets too, right? I should have rights to half, even after the divorce. It's joint property, so give me half, whether it's money or land. I was completely disgusted. Since it's premarital property, it doesn't count as joint property. I thought you, being highly educated and a genius, would know that. Who put such foolish thoughts in your head? You're pretty, so it must be your new boyfriend, right? Must be a lawyer. As I remained silent in dismay, he continued with more absurd statements. Finally, I said, I'm not relying on anyone, but I thought that statement was common sense. I did attend law school, so I have a bit of knowledge, though it's all quite basic. Ben then shouted. What? I thought you were just a high school grad. I never heard about this. You traitor. You seem to make decisions based on assumptions, maybe you've just assumed all along. And if anyone deserves to be called a betrayer, isn't it you who cheated? I responded calmly. What's with that way of talking? So you're rich, huh? Give me back the moving expenses. Pay for our moving expenses too, as compensation. As you previously said, I am just a poor person with only $13 million in assets. I can't compare to your wealthy mistress. So, as planned, I will rely on your mercy for the moving expenses. And I need to know what the compensation is for before I can pay it. I replied with a sarcastic tone. Unable to respond, he muttered to himself and left. The next day, he called me, in a panicked voice. What's going on? Why is the cancellation fee for the house amounting to $10,000? That's 2 months' rent. Why is the rent $5,000 a month? It's a detached house in a high-end residential area. Didn't you ever wonder? It was my house. But a month before our divorce, I transferred the ownership to someone else and we've been renting it under your name. You left the house matters to me, and you initiating the divorce really helped me out. It seems that Ben, who had always lived in his parents' home, had no idea about rent or even how much living costs. So I was living in your house and being supported by you. Even over the phone, I could sense his shock. A few days later, Ben called me again, in a flustered tone. Hey. What's this about $800 for child support and property division? You're rich, so you don't need it, right? He said. In fact, while preparing for the divorce, I had been gathering evidence of his verbal abuse and his failure to provide living expenses. The luxury diary Ben had prepared had, unbeknownst to him, become a record of our child's growth and also a record of his abusive behavior. This was also a key piece of evidence. Furthermore, I had hired a private investigator to obtain evidence of his infidelity. With a lawyer, I demanded a hefty sum for both his abuse and infidelity. At first, I hadn't planned to request child support. However, I am unemployed despite having assets, and I thought it was right for him, as a father, to contribute to his son. Thus I requested child support as well. Ben also said, "You must be dating that lawyer." Impossible. The lawyer I hired was a woman. Ben's assumptions were pitifully wrong. All I could do was laugh. Then, the investigation by the private investigator uncovered something even more shocking. That so-called president's daughter, Ben's mistress, was actually a marriage scam artist. Her story of being a president's daughter was a complete lie. She had tricked him into covering all her debts under the pretense that her father, supposedly the president, would pay him back as a wedding gift. And then she disappeared without a trace. Ben was in a panic. And now, with no money left, Ben said, "Let me stay until I find the next house." Then he added something ridiculous. "You own some apartments, right? Give me one for free. Out of consideration for us being ex-spouses." As the saying goes, a barking dog seldom bites. Ben kept barking. Realizing it was futile to respond, I listened silently until the end and then said, I believe you've received the notice, but I have retained a lawyer. It's problematic for you to contact me this way. Please communicate through the lawyer from now on. If you wish to have visitation with your son, please file for visitation mediation. Then I hung up. After that, I blocked all phone calls, emails, and other communications. It was a relief not to hear his nonsense and complaints. 3 years after the divorce, there has been no contact from him wishing for visitation. Honestly, I am relieved. I never want my son to meet his father or his family and relatives. The risk of kidnapping or Ben's traits of making assumptions passing on to my son is too troublesome. I never want to see, or have my son see, or interact with Ben again. Even now, I hear about him through mutual friends. Apparently, Ben lost all his assets, and with the child support and property division payments. He is living an uncomfortable life at his parents' house. His tendency to jump to conclusions caused trouble at work, leading to his dismissal. Now, he works tirelessly day and night at a low-paying job. Despite all he said about my looks, his hair is unkempt, and his shirts are always wrinkled. Meanwhile, I have built a new house and am living there with my son. Since Ben knew about the mansion, I sold it and built a new house on completely different land. I've managed to properly invest the other assets I had left unattended. And now I'm earning an income from them. I cherish every moment with my son as he grows, enjoying our days together. Also, coinciding with my son's entry to kindergarten, I re-enrolled in the law school. I had given up when I was younger, but now I'm working hard every day to become a lawyer. I'm using the money from Ben for my tuition. I want to become a reliable woman like my impressive lawyer who helped me. And to make my son proud of me. There's still so much life ahead. I have erased my ex-husband from my memory and plan to enjoy life with my wonderful son. You can't even do housework, you're useless. Pay me the property division too. As soon as he entered the hospital room, David half smiled and said this to me. Connected to many tubes. A girl I didn't know was standing beside him. David doesn't know that my total assets amount to $9 million. He should understand that getting a divorce in this situation is a matter of life and death for me as a housewife. Fine. Here, take the divorce papers. Yet, here he was, verbally abusing his wife in such a state. I, who had been carrying the divorce papers as a charm, pulled them out of the drawer and handed them to David. David smirked as he took them. This is goodbye. Then, I'm going to be happy with her, don't worry. Right, Sherry? David said this and put his arm around the girl's waist. The girl, called Sherry, leaned on David while scoffing at me. Ma'am. Oh, you're not a ma'am anymore. Take care, old lady. With those words as their cue, the two of them laughed and left the hospital room. However, their fun is only for now. Left alone in the hospital room, I burst out laughing. Today is Friday, so the divorce papers will be processed on Monday. Oh, I'm looking forward to 3 days from now. My name is Amy Gale. I am a 45-year-old housewife. My parents run an ordinary farm, and while I don't have any remarkable skills, I can proudly say that I have a wide repertoire of cooking. My husband David is the same age, and we were university classmates. Both of us had come from the countryside to New York, and since we both lived alone, I used to cook various dishes for David using vegetables and rice sent from home because he couldn't cook. People often said I had captured his heart through his stomach, and I was aware of it. David couldn't do any housework at all, and I had been taking care of him since our dating days. Because of that, I have been doing all the housework since we got married. Unfortunately, we were not blessed with children, but we enjoyed our life together as a couple. We both loved to eat, and on David's days off, we would go on little trips, driving around to eat delicious food. David was kind during the early years of our marriage, but about 3 years later, he became a typical authoritarian husband. Though he never resorted to physical violence, his way of speaking became harsh. And he would frequently say, "Who do you think is paying for this life?" It would be a lie to say his words didn't hurt, but even if I asked him to stop, he wouldn't listen, and I didn't have the energy to fight back. Being a housewife made me feel inferior, and I couldn't assert myself. After graduating from university, David joined a renowned company but resigned after about 5 years. He found a new job quickly but kept resigning after short periods. Because of this, our income was unstable, and I researched ways to save money to get by, though it was often hard to cover the living expenses. However, he has been getting along with his colleagues at the company. He started working at 2 years ago, and I was harboring a faint hope that he might stay there for a long time. Then one day, David came home earlier than usual. "I'm home. I quit my job again." "What, again?" My surprised response made David's eyebrows twitch. I hurriedly stopped what I was doing in the kitchen and ran to him. "I'm sorry. I was just surprised." No welcome or words of appreciation, just criticizing what your husband does. "You've become quite something." David's words made me tense up. He was in a very bad mood today. If I said something wrong, it could lead to serious trouble. "I'm sorry. As long as you understand." It seemed that my apology had somewhat eased his irritation. David, still openly grumpy, sat down on the sofa and turned on the TV. I quietly placed a beer and a glass on the table. "Would you like to eat, or would you like a bath?" "Food, and more drinks." "Understood." I continued to play the role of a submissive wife, not to upset David's mood. The real me used to be more assertive. But over the 14 years of being with David since we married at 28, I had almost completely stopped expressing myself. David filled his stomach with alcohol and snacks and fell asleep on the sofa, snoring. The table was so messy it looked like a child had eaten there. And I cleaned up the fallen beer bottles and food scraps from the floor. It wasn't supposed to be like this. Remembering the happy marriage I had dreamed of as a young girl, my true feelings slipped out. I glanced at David, but there was no sign he would wake up. I sighed in relief, yet I was terrified that this life would continue. Maybe it's time to consider a divorce. I started to face the problems I had been avoiding, and organized my schedule for the following days in my head. David began visiting the employment office the next day and quickly secured another job. While he was job hunting at the employment office, I went to the municipal office and got a divorce form, signing it on the spot. I wasn't planning to submit it yet, but I thought I'd keep it as a charm. The signed divorce form was hidden at the bottom of my usual bag. If discovered, I couldn't imagine what would be said. "Hey, where were you loitering while I was job hunting?" "I went to buy a resume at the stationery store." "Look, I thought you might need it." "Is that so?" "Unusually thoughtful of you." David, who had returned home before me, initially questioned me suspiciously but soon cheered up. I handed him the resume I had pre-purchased. After receiving it, David said he was going out for drinks with a friend and left. David's new job was at a solid company with better salary and benefits than any of his previous workplaces. After working for about 3 years and getting promoted, I was secretly hoping that David might finally stay with this job until retirement. as he seemed happy drinking in the evenings. It seems that David's department is in sales, and he often leaves home saying he has client dinners at night. I took full advantage of the brief moments of freedom to refresh myself and welcome David home with a smile. One day, I received a call from my mother for the first time in a while. After listening to her excited story, I was shocked. $9 million. Yes, $9 million. The mountains and lands we originally owned. You don't need them anymore, right? When we had them appraised, they were worth $10 million. We can enjoy our retirement with just $1 million. So, I think you should consider restarting your life. My mother never thought highly of David, and since his domineering behavior worsened, she was worried about me not being able to visit my parents' home. I was surprised by the huge amount. Moreover, it seems my mother had transferred it to my name when she inherited it from my grandmother. And I was even more surprised to hear that there would be no inheritance tax. You better not tell David. But my mother, sensing my hesitation, said, "The final decision is yours," and hung up the phone. I knew I should report it immediately. Part of me thought that with this money, I could live freely, while another part wasn't ready to decide. About a week later, I had a traffic accident. Fortunately, the injuries were not life-threatening, but I needed to stay in the hospital for about a week. After storing my valuables in the hospital room's drawer, I immediately contacted David. "I'm sorry, I got injured." What about my dinner? While I felt like sighing at David worrying more about his meal than my injury, I continued talking. "It looks like I'll need to be hospitalized for a week. Sorry, but could you buy your meals somewhere until I'm discharged? Can't even prepare a meal for your husband, what a lazy wife." "Oh, wait, I'm coming over now." David said this and abruptly hung up the phone. I had intended to tell him about the inheritance tonight, but maybe it's better not to mention it. Looking at the many tubes attached to me during a precautionary checkup, I somehow felt that was the right decision. And soon, I would feel the correctness of that decision painfully. A wife who can't even do housework is useless. Pay me the property division too. As soon as he entered the hospital room, David said this to me, half smiling while I was connected to many tubes. A girl I didn't know was standing beside him. David doesn't know about my total assets of $9 million. He should understand that getting a divorce in this situation is a matter of life and death for me as a housewife. Fine. Here, take the divorce papers. Even so, I wouldn't want a man who verbally abuses his wife in such a state. I pulled the divorce papers I had been keeping as a charm from the drawer and handed them to David. David smirked as he received them. "This means goodbye. Then, I'm going to be happy with her, so don't worry. Right, Sherry?" David said this and put his arm around the girl's waist. The girl, called Sherry, leaned on David while scoffing at me. "Ma'am." "Oh, you're not a ma'am anymore. Take care, old lady." With those words as their cue, the two of them laughed and left the hospital room. However, their fun is only for now. Left alone in the hospital room, I burst out laughing. Today is Friday, so the divorce papers will be processed on Monday. Oh, I'm looking forward to 3 days from now. As I expected, there was no contact from David over the weekend, and it was very peaceful. The situation of not having to do anything since getting married made me restless, and the nurses kept telling me to rest. Then on Monday evening, my cell phone was flooded with calls from David. At first, I ignored it, but after 30 minutes of non-stop ringing, I got fed up and decided to answer. "Hey, you're being persistent with the calls. Hey. What is this about?" As soon as I picked up the phone, David started yelling. I couldn't help but laugh. David seemed infuriated by my laughter, half crazed, shouting something. What are you talking about? Don't play dumb. The divorce papers haven't been processed. David was fuming on the other end of the phone. I kept giggling and responded to his complaints. Oh, I filed a non-acceptance notice before. Remember? You used to say let's divorce whenever we fought. I thought it wouldn't be right if you filed the divorce papers just on the spur of the moment. Ugh. No, but I don't need it anymore. Withdraw it right now. David hesitated for a moment but soon ordered again. However, I'm no longer just going to listen to what David says. I can't do it until I'm discharged. It requires paperwork at the city office. Then get discharged now. Don't be unreasonable. His selfish demands only made me laugh even more. He probably plans to register his marriage with Sherry, whom he brought on Friday. David was clearly panicking. Oh, by the way, was her name Sherry? She's your mistress, right? Hey, that's rude to Sherry. Apologize. She's my new wife. Since we're not divorced yet, she's technically still a mistress. When I calmly responded to David's nonsensical remarks, he groaned oddly. I pressed on further. By the way, I'll have my lawyer contact you about the property division and compensation later.
Yeah.
Compensation. I'll make sure you pay for all this hassle. David seemed to misunderstand something and suddenly became cheerful. Normally, the person at fault pays compensation. I've always taken care of the household properly, and of course, I've never committed any acts of infidelity. It's clear that David is the responsible party. What are you misunderstanding? You're the one who should be paying compensation. Huh? David genuinely seemed not to understand, replying in a confused tone. He probably believes that by not taking care of him while I'm hospitalized, I am the one at fault. Even in the early era, being hospitalized wouldn't count as fault. I thought bitterly to myself as I patiently explained. What fault of mine? Just so you know, being unable to do household chores because I'm hospitalized does not constitute fault. You're neglecting to take care of me. If you were a child, this might be considered neglect. But you're an adult, capable of taking care of yourself. That's why this doesn't count as fault. If I say it's your fault, then it's your fault. Such childlike logic would surprise even a judge, I thought, as I metaphorically fell over in my mind. Had I really been so underestimated? As I remained silent, David said, "Finally got it, huh?" In a tone that made me bristle. Irritated, I responded. Don't you know the law? Fault is defined by specific reasons. Like infidelity, that is, having another woman despite having a wife. That's why Sherry is my new wife, and you're just an old tool, so it doesn't apply, does it? What are you talking about? Since you dated her secretly from me, it's clearly infidelity. David seemed unconvinced. He appeared determined not to change his attitude, convinced of his own righteousness. Anyway, please communicate through the lawyer from now on. Goodbye. Hey, Amy. I hung up without listening to David's protests. He called multiple times after that, but I ignored him until he finally gave up. Relieved, I thought I was done with him, but the next day it brought a new headache. Exasperated by the non-stop ringing of the phone from 9 a.m., I pressed the call button. On the other side, David was rattling off complaints like a machine gun. I couldn't fully grasp what he was saying, but it seemed to be about being unable to withdraw money from the account. If it was a joint account, David should have been able to withdraw without a problem. But if not, I remembered the bank card and passbook I had left at home and asked David, "Did you try to take money out of my account?" Yes. You're still hospitalized. So I thought I'd take the money in your account as compensation, but the card doesn't work. David was furiously ranting with his irrational claim. It seemed he hadn't understood what I had said yesterday. When I was determined to be hospitalized for a week, I had called the bank to make sure no withdrawals could be made from my account until I handled it in person after discharge. This was to prevent David from squandering the savings while I was away. And my decision was proving to be correct. After all, it's unthinkable to try to take money from an ex-wife's account without consent. However, David didn't seem to think there was anything wrong with his plan. And he demanded that I make the withdrawal possible immediately. What are you saying? We're strangers now. Why would I do as you say? You. What a person. Even if we say we're getting a divorce, the fact that you were my wife doesn't change. Act like a wife should and listen. We're practically strangers now, even if the divorce papers haven't been filed yet. Do you understand? Unfortunately, I don't have money to give to a stranger. Since I had never been so defiant before, David was shocked on the other end of the phone. But he quickly returned to his domineering tone. Just do as I say. Hurry up and send the money. Pay me compensation for not doing the housework. David had been considered smart when we first met, but sadly, he seemed to have intelligence without common sense. After 17 years of marriage, it was clear I had misjudged him, and I was exasperated. David seemed frustrated that I was not agreeing. Likely, he had run out of cash on hand and tried to tap into the household funds and the joint account. I spoke to him as if he were a small child. Listen, I'm no longer your obedient wife. The property division will be handled through a lawyer later. What? How dare you? I'm coming over now, wait for me. David said this and hung up. I didn't mind if he came to the hospital. But I had already asked the nurse station to let no one but my parents visit. Therefore, it was unlikely that David would make it to my room. David really did come to the hospital, but as expected, he was stopped at the nurse station. The phone rang repeatedly, but I ignored it until it switched to messages. And the screen was filled with a flood of notifications. I saved all of these as evidence and contacted the lawyer. After a while, the lawyer must have contacted David because the messages stopped coming. I thought this was the end, but I was soon proven wrong. The day before my discharge, a nurse came to me with a visitor request. A Miss Kathy Brown would like to visit you. What would you like to do? Kathy? Please let her in. Kathy was a friend I shared hobbies with. During my single days, she responded to my SNS posts about our food adventures. And we became friends because we lived nearby and often went out to eat together. After marriage, I had to cut back on such outings. But we kept in touch by having coffee and chatting regularly. Amy, are you okay? How's your injury? Yes, it's much better now. Thank you. Kathy expressed her concern as soon as she entered the room, warming my heart. Thinking back, since being hospitalized, I realized no one but my parents and hospital staff had shown concern for me. Amy, isn't this a really tough time for you? Huh, why? I haven't told anyone but my parents about my situation. So why does Kathy know? I was very curious and asked her. Then Kathy said something surprising. Wasn't Sherry Hansen, that young girl, having an affair with your husband? What? How do you know that? Wait, you know her? Actually, she's my niece. Kathy answered hesitantly, and I was speechless. I couldn't believe Kathy was Sherry's aunt. The room fell silent. It was the first time it had been quiet around Kathy, and it felt incredibly uneasy. Kathy was the first to break the silence. You see, Sherry suddenly told her mother she was getting married. And the man is 45 years old. Her mother was shocked. When she showed her mother his picture, it was your husband, Amy. I was so surprised. I've already told her. Amy, I'm really sorry my niece has caused you such trouble. Don't apologize, Kathy, it's not your fault. Kathy looked like she was about to cry as she looked at me. I thought for a moment and then asked Kathy. I plan to ask for compensation from Sherry as well. I can't compromise on that. But I wonder, does this mean our friendship is over? Not at all. I want to keep being friends with you, Amy. I'll make sure Sherry pays the compensation. Both her mother and I can't forgive what she's done. We'll keep a close eye on her. I was very grateful for Kathy's words. Kathy and I have been friends for over 20 years. I don't want to lose a precious friend because of my awful husband and his affair. I told Kathy about a meeting planned for tomorrow and that I wanted her to come. Kathy happily agreed. And she even offered to provide photos that could serve as evidence of the affair. The next day, right after being discharged, I went to a private restaurant with my lawyer, where David and Sherry had already arrived, gorging on expensive French cuisine. I was speechless at their self-centeredness, and David smirked at me. Finally showed up. Did you bring the money? You're paying for this too. David continued to eat as he spoke to me. Sherry also kept eating, smirking alongside him. I decided to fight back. Please handle the payment yourselves. Also, I'm here to demand compensation from both of you. How long are you going to sulk? You're really not cute. Ignoring David's rude remarks, my lawyer and I sat down and showed evidence that David was at fault. We presented legal documents about fault and materials about compensation and asset division. Lastly, I showed the photos Kathy had given me of Sherry and David entering a hotel with another man Sherry didn't know. What? Why? Hey. Sherry, what is this? David and Sherry were unsettled by the photos, and they finally stopped eating. Just then, Kathy entered at the perfect moment. I took those photos. Kathy. Sherry seemed confused to see her aunt here. Then Kathy coldly looked down at Sherry and David and spoke calmly about wanting them to realize how low their actions were. Also, Sherry. You said you were pregnant with his child. But with this behavior, it's unclear whose child it is. No, I mean. Sherry faltered at Kathy's comment. It was the first time I heard she was pregnant, and looking at her today, I wouldn't have guessed she was. But from David's reaction, it seemed she had indeed claimed to be pregnant. So you are pregnant. In that case, we will proceed with a DNA test and then add that to the compensation. No, please. I lied about being pregnant, I'm sorry. Sherry suddenly confessed and apologized. She had been looking for an older man who would provide money, and David had been her target. He bought her brand items, and said once they were married, she wouldn't have to work and could do whatever she liked. So she thought she could be a housewife and casually see other men as she pleased. She lied about being pregnant because he showed no signs of actually divorcing. David just gaped, stunned. I'm really sorry. But I can't pay any compensation. I don't have the money. I'll pay Amy first. You will work part-time every month and pay me back. No playing around until you've paid it all back. No way. Sherry looked utterly defeated. Kathy said she would bring her sister to apologize again later and led Sherry out of the restaurant. David, who had been in a daze, suddenly tried to sweet-talk me. Hey, it seems I was deceived. I can't live without you, Amy. We still have the divorce papers here, can't we start over? You've been a housewife all this time, you can't start working now, can you? I listened to David's plea with a cold gaze, but none of his words touched me. After he finished, I responded with a smile. I can live quite well without you. So I'll take the divorce papers now and file them right after this. Also, I haven't told you yet, but my total assets are currently $9 million. So, I can live comfortably until my old age without working, please don't worry. $9 million. Why didn't you tell me about that kind of money? I was going to tell you, but you started shouting about divorce. I'll definitely demand compensation. And this money is my personal inheritance, so it's not subject to division of property. It has nothing to do with you, right? David looked at me with a look of despair. My lawyer quickly handed him the documents and a pen to sign. After that, my lawyer and I left and immediately filed the divorce papers. Thus, a chapter of about 20 years of marriage came to an end. Later, the compensation was transferred to me in Sherry's name in one lump sum. Kathy told me that Sherry's mother, having learned of the situation, was furious. She had Sherry take a break from university to work at a relative's inn without break until she repaid the compensation. As for David, his in-laws disowned him after learning about the divorce. They told him they wouldn't help at all, and he reluctantly took out a loan and paid it off all at once. It also came out that he had been going to the hotel with Sherry during work hours. He was fired from his job and is now working multiple jobs on construction sites to pay off his debts. As for me, even though I came into a significant sum, I didn't know what to do with it and donated half to charity. With the remaining money, I moved to the countryside and am enjoying a luxurious single life. Kathy and I continue to interact, and on days off, we go out to eat or take little trips. Since we both planned to remain single, I suggested perhaps we should share a room. Initially hesitant, Kathy couldn't resist the lure of shared mail orders and my cooking, and she agreed. Next week, we'll start moving, and I'm excited about the new life ahead. From now on, I want to live honestly and enjoy myself.